All right, so today we're talking about vibrato, and not the effect, but the actual technique that we use to make our notes sound more musical and to help contribute to our overall sonic identity. Here's a breakdown of what the video has in store. Number one, we're going to talk about vibrato, what it is and why it's important. Number two, we're going to talk about the different types of vibrato and these three specific techniques that we tend to see across genres. And number three, some other miscellaneous loose ends that we need to tie up when discussing vibrato. So let's get into it. Number one, what is vibrato and why is it important? Vibrato is characterized as this kind of warbling of sound. There's lots of different ways that people describe it, but essentially what it is it's a slight bending in and out of pitch when playing one single note. Often when people think about it, they think of opera singers most, but we use it a lot in guitar. It sounds like this on guitar. Now, the reason it's important is because outside of your initial pick attack, your vibrato is probably the most identifying characteristic of your sonic calling card. When I was in high school, one of my music teachers told me about a study that they did in the early 2000s, and while this study is about trumpet players, I believe it applies to guitarists as well. In the early 2000s, they took the principal chair trumpet players from the top orchestras all across the world, the LA Phil, the New York Symphony, the Berlin Philharmonic, you name it. And they had them record a solo excerpt, once with vibrato, once without vibrato. And the idea behind this study was they were trying to figure out what are the identifying characteristics of a player's sound. So they took those two recordings and then went in and digitally edited out the initial attack of each note that the player played. And then they took all four of these recordings and presented them to the other players in the orchestras for each of these trumpet players and had them try to blindly pick out which solo was from their colleague that was in their orchestra. What they discovered is that when the other musicians listened to the recordings that had the initial attack and the vibrato, their accuracy in figuring out which recording was their colleague that was in their orchestra was almost 100%. Then when they took away the vibrato, it diminished slightly to about 80%. Then once they took away both the initial attack and the vibrato, the accuracy dropped to below 20%. And then once they added back in the vibrato, but left the initial attack out, accuracy went almost back up to that 80% mark. It was probably closer to around 65, 70%. This is why vibrato is so important. Many of us say that tone is in the hands. Well, I would say that if you were to try to break down what that tone in the hands comes down to, it comes down to those two important things, the initial pick attack and of course, vibrato, which is why we're making this video today. Now, there are three main types of vibrato that I feel like we can really narrow it down to, and I would refer to them as classical, anchored, and unanchored. The first one that we're going to talk about, classical. The reason why it's classical is because number one, it's the classical technique, and number two, it really only works on a classical guitar. It's very reminiscent of like a violin or a cello vibrato, in that what you're going to do is whatever note you're trying to do the vibrato on, you're going to find it with your finger, and then we're going to move horizontally between the fret. We're not moving outside of the fret or anything like that. It's just horizontally in here. And it looks somewhat like this. Now, I don't claim to be a classical guitarist, but that's the idea, is that our finger is moving, like I said, horizontally in between the fret, and we get this kind of rolling motion on our fingertip. It provides a very subtle vibrato. I mean, we're talking microtonal. I don't even think you can say it goes to a quarter tone. But it's a very sweet vibrato, and like I said, it works best on nylon or classical guitars. After that, it works pretty okay on electric guitars, and honestly, it's almost non-existent on acoustic guitars. Our second type of vibrato that we're going to look at, I like to call anchored. Now, some other people call it different things. I call it anchored because I feel like it most aptly describes how you do it. So this is how I would describe the anchored technique. You're going to go ahead and find your target note, and regardless of if you're doing it with your ring finger, your middle finger, or your first finger, you always want your hand to be anchored, or you kind of want a pivot point somewhere between this knuckle and this knuckle. and make that pivot point right up against the edge of that fretboard. You see it's there. For me, it's back towards this knuckle. I've seen other people have it more in there as well. But we find the target note, got it anchored, and then what you're going to do is you're going to wave like the queen, right? We're going to give this kind of movement, but make sure that we're anchored against that inside of the knuckle there. Now, some people will choose to do it with their thumb back here. I like my thumb to be over. I feel like it gives me a better control. And then you pluck the target note and start your vibrato. This gives us a lot of options in terms of like how wide we can make our vibrato and how fast. You could just do kind of a really wide, big vibrato. Or you could do a shallow, quick one, which is what I tend to do. This, when it comes to actual technique, is probably our more consistent and our more like tamed version of vibrato, because you can get as tamed or untamed as you want to be, right? There's a lot of room for you to control it. You'll see that most players that do this are players in the rock or heavy metal genre, and if you want a good example of it, you can look at players like Joe Satriani, John Petrucci, those players that are very much trained in their technique and have that modern sound are players who usually use this anchored type. The third type of vibrato that we're going to talk about is what I would refer to as unanchored, and as you can probably guess, it is a type of vibrato where we don't have the anchor or the pivot that we talked about in the previous technique. So we're still doing that bending motion or that vertical motion, but instead of holding on to the neck in order to make it happen, we're going to let go of the neck, and we're either going to move our whole forearm up and down, or like B.B. King talks about, he kind of does the wave like the queen motion as well. He just lets go of the neck, and that's where his signature sound comes from. When I think about where I first saw this and really noticed it, it was probably Stevie Ray Vaughan. I know others have said that Eric Clapton has used it, and it's where I first noticed someone doing something different with their hand. And to me, it's this very wide, erratic vibrato. When you see Stevie do it, he's usually doing something like this. And like I said, it's very wide, it's very erratic. You can get really, really big vibrato. Now, B.B. King has been able to do a very shallow vibrato that's pretty quick, but generally speaking, most people that use it get a very wide vibrato. It's very aggressive, and the reason why is because while we have our target note here, we're moving the strings so much that we'll often pass above the target note, come back to pitch, and then go the other way, and so you get this kind of sound, but very fast. Now we reached kind of the miscellaneous little tidbits that we got to use to wrap this up. Number one, you'll notice that, like I mentioned, a lot of these kind of go hand in hand with specific genres or style of playing. So if you are a classical player, you're probably going to want to use that nice, pretty horizontal vibrato. If you're wanting to be more of a rock or metal player, that anchored vibrato is probably for you. And if you want to sound like the greats, Albert King, B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, and so many other incredible blues players, you probably want that kind of untamed, raw, unanchored sound. Number two, there's something kind of unique with guitar in that normally when other instruments or singers find their target pitch, they're able to make that movement either above the pitch or below the pitch. We can demonstrate that sound using a slide. However, with the techniques mentioned before, we really can only bend above the note, and then we have to come back to that pitch. Even if we go the other way, we're still just bending above the pitch and then returning to target pitch. However, there is a way around this, and that is, if this is our target pitch, we can bend to it or pre-bend to it, and then we can do the vibrato up there. So it kind of sounds like this. You can hear how there's this kind of, it's a little bit sweeter to have it dip down a little bit. So a lot of players will use that pre-bend technique to get the vibrato that goes on either side of the note. Number 3, these are not the only ways to achieve vibrato. These are just kind of the main ways that we use to achieve it with our left hand specifically, and therefore our most commonly used ways. The first way that many of you might be thinking of is using a trem arm or a whammy bar. I don't even own one. I'm not a real guitarist. But you can use that to go up and down, and it's also nice because you can use it on chords. The other way that people will do vibrato, and a lot of times with chords, is they'll actually kind of hold the body of their guitar and wiggle their neck back and forward ever so slightly, and you're actually bending the neck. Now, this can be terrifying to do, especially on acoustic guitars, which are already fragile and under a lot of tension. Electrics, especially bolt-on necks, can usually be done, but if you do it and you snap your neck, don't blame me. Usually there's not a lot of speed to this type of vibrato, but you can still get some really cool textures, especially when you add reverb, make it big and open, and give yourself a lot of room to kind of mess with it. Like I said before, vibrato is an essential part of your sonic identity, and you control what that sonic identity is by how fast or slow you choose to do the vibrato, or how wide you choose to do your vibrato. Now, I tend to lean towards the anchored option unless I'm doing something that is very soft and sweet, then I will do classical, or unless I need something that's super crazy, in which case I will do the erratic unanchored. Why do I say this? Because that means you need to learn all three and use them in various contexts all across your playing. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. For those of you who are new here, please like and subscribe. For those of you who are returning, thank you for being part of the channel. My name is Mac Wright. Please go make someone else's day better, and we will see you around.